Hello and welcome to this video looking at nationalism and their views on human nature. This is part of my political ideas series, which is designed for A-level politics, where I've looked at the core ideologies of liberalism, conservatism and socialism, and I'm now moving on to nationalism, and I look at all the key aspects of it: human nature, the economy, the society and the state, and I look at the key thinkers, and I look at the different strands of the ideology. So you'll find all these different things on the different political ideas within this playlist. So today we're concentrating on nationalism and human nature. Now, nationalist ideas on human nature essentially highlight irrationality. So human nature is seen by nationalists and in nationalism thinking as being essentially something that people cannot change or choose or control. So a key part of a person's identity is their nation. So again, you can't choose what nation you're from, you can't change it, you've made no conscious decision. But according to nationalism, there will be aspects of being from that nation will have a really strong impact on your identity and how you act and how you feel about things and the way you behave. A good example of this comes from one of the key thinkers for nationalism, is Johann Gottfried von Herder, and he wrote about the people, a nation, a folk, having what he called the Volksgeist, which is a kind of spirit that binds people together. Now this according to Herder was based on shared language, and it leads to a shared culture. Now, it is also associated with a belief that that kind of particular language and culture is superior or better than that held by other people. Not necessarily the case, but those bits are often connected. So with this belief, humanity will be divided into nations, because all the different nations will have their own spirit, their own thing that binds them together and will make them distinct and different. Herder rejected liberal ideas of kind of universalism, so ideas of universal rights and universal elements of how things should be created, and he rejected that and the Enlightenment. And again, so we can see that this is really not a very progressive idea in terms of human nature. Now, Herder's idea of German nationalism was based on language, not race. Now, later on we see in Germany, we see a Nazi version of German nationalism, which focused on race as well as language and culture. Now, they came up with the idea of a kind of people's community, a Volksgemeinschaft. And we can clearly here see a link back to von Herder's idea of the Volksgeist, this kind of spirit. And this is, again, one of the really troubling things with nationalism, where we can see this connection sometimes between seemingly straightforward connections like language or culture, and then we start blending in race as well, and we lead to some really dangerous ideas where we see groups being suppressed and oppressed and rejected from a nation on the basis that they don't fit with the other dominant groups. Not the case in all nationalism, but it does tend to lead to that those forms of irrational human behaviour. Right, the concept of the nation is really important in nationalism, obviously, and this impacts on kind of how it affects human behaviour and human attitudes as well. Now, the difficulty with all this is there's not one single thing that makes a nation, and there's this kind of list that is just on screen at the moment, and how much emphasis there are on different bits of this list depends on different nations. So some will have all these elements, some will have some and not others, and some might only focus on one. So language you've spoken about in terms of ideas from Herder, and the idea that language leads to shared culture and a shared history, and it binds people together. So you could see the German nation being based on the people who are German speakers, which might be bigger than the nation state, which is Germany, and definitely predates the nation state, which is Germany. Religion can be a key element of national identity. So, for example, they often speak about Jewish identity in terms of a nation which is bound in religion. Islamic leaders have often tried to connect religion and nationalism. We see Gaddafi in Libya, Jinnah in Pakistan, who combined kind of religion and nationalism together. We see it with Christian countries as well. So, for example, Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church, strong connections with religion and nation in in countries like Italy, for example. Now, we can see the nation being based on a cultural idea. So, for example, Britain is multinational because you've got the English and the Welsh and the Scots and the Northern Irish. So we can see that there's multinational areas. We also have a multi-ethnic country. But therefore, kind of British nationalism could be based on a kind of ideas of shared culture and pride in British history and pride in British kind of cultural ideas, so kind of art and music and literature and shared values. So that might be the key aspect of the nation. Ethnicity can be an element of a nation. Sometimes we see a nation matching with a particular ethnic group and that building as part of the nation states. We see that, for example, in China and Japan and Scandinavian nations. It can lead, or connections with ethnicity can lead to what we would call nativism, where a group kind of says, well, the nation really is ours, and then there's these other groups who have come in, and there's a kind of rejection of those and believe that the original group, or in the case of America, the group that arrived before some other groups arrived, kind of go, well, this is our nation and it should face our values rather than bring in the values of other groups. There can be a particular geographic attachment, and this is often the case with a nation state. We see particular attachments, for example, in Russia they talk about Mother Russia, a particular association, a certain area of land. It's not always the case, again, as we've spoken about German nationalism, where German nationalism predates the nation state of Germany, and it is a broader concept than attachment to a particular geographical area. Right, now nationalism leads to really strong connections, and this again feeds into the ideas of irrationality. Now, nationalism can stem from one or multiple of the concepts we've seen on the previous bit of the video. Now, what nationalists tend to agree on is whatever that form it takes, the connection is very, very strong, and it makes people distinct from other nations. And where we've got distinction and saying that we are different, then this can then lead to some really quite dangerous ideas. And so if the basis is kind of beliefs in cultural or racial difference, in terms of forming nationalism, this can have a very strong impact on how people behave and how people treat other people from other races or other nations or other cultures, and can lead to kind of highly irrational beliefs and behaviour, and some of the kind of really negative aspects of what we see in human behaviour. So cultural nationalism. So this has got different aspects, and some are more positive than others. So you get liberal cultural nationalism, which you might see, for example, in Wales, where you've got a distinctive culture, distinctive language, which is under threat because it exists in a nation state where there is a dominant culture which is kind of overriding it. And so we see Welsh nationalism, not necessarily demanding Welsh independence, but a lot of Welsh nationalism is about protection of their language and their culture. We see a similar thing with the Bretons in France, and we see this with various minority groups elsewhere in the world. And they tend to seek protection and support rather than independence. And this kind of fits with liberal ideas and liberal ideology. Now, we can get ultra-conservative beliefs in terms of cultural nationalism, and this tends to feed into the idea that the particular culture is superior to the others in surrounding groups, and this can lead to militarism and expansionism. And when you combine cultural nationalism with ethnic nationalism or racial nationalism, then you get fascism, and you get groups like Nazis in Germany and the fascists in Italy. So cultural nationalism is not necessarily kind of hugely negative, but the ultra-conservative bit, which then leads into fascism, very clearly is. And then one aspect which definitely is very, very negative in terms of in relation to human nature and human behaviour linking with nationalism is where we have racialism and racism. So racialism sees the key element of national identity to be race. Now, you could say as a starting point that might be fairly neutral. It just says we are a nation because we are this particular group. But what it tends to do is very quickly become something that is very negative and very divisive, because what we tend to see within these within nations which see race as a key national identifier is we might well therefore see one race being favoured over others within the nation state, where there are multiple races but one race that takes dominant political and economic control. It can take the form of nativism, suggesting an original group or a particular group within the nation has more rights to receive better economic and political preferences, and we've seen that in America with this, where there was a big reaction against various waves of immigration following the initial immigration of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and then particularly when there was East European immigration and clashes with Catholic groups and things like that, and obviously with the huge issues of racism in there as well. So racism, as we see coming through nationalism, can be based on the belief that a racial group is superior to others, leading to oppression of other races. And we see horrendous examples of this in history. For example, apartheid in South Africa, segregation in the United States. We see examples of tribal racism within some African states where one tribe gains dominance and then uses its power to oppress others, and we see the horrors of the genocide carried out in Nazi Germany with the Holocaust and the treatment of non-Aryan German groups. So nationalism can lead to really, really oppressive, violent and irrational human behaviour. It's not necessarily inherent in nationalism that it will do, but there is aspects of nationalism which says that there's a key part of human nature which is not something people have chosen, and then if we start talking about unique cultural spirit and things like that, it tends to lead down the path as we've described. Right, so thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, to comment, to subscribe to my channel. Look at the other aspects of the playlist which go through similar ideas in the different ideologies, and I will be continuing to add to this playlist, and we'll be moving on to look at nationalism in terms of the economy and society and the state, and I'll look at the different forms of nationalism in more detail, and I'll also look at the key thinkers in detail as well in another video later on. So depending on when you're watching this, they may well be there already, but if they aren't, they are definitely coming. Right, thank you very much again for watching.